Greetings from Washington, our nation's capital. And welcome once again to our Bhagavad-gita Satsang. I'm Hari-kirtana, and it's an honor to have you here with me and a great pleasure for me to be here with you. I'm very happy to see a few people here who I haven't seen in a little while. So thank you very much for being here. It's great to see you. And assuming that, well, we won't assume anything because you know what happens when you assume. Please let me know if I can be heard by hitting the little raise your hand icon. That will assure me that I can be heard. Alistair, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, very, very good. Now that I know that you can hear me, let's get on with the show and take care of our usual bit of housekeeping business. A few of you are new to the satsang, so you ought to know that you can adjust your audio settings and your viewing options. You need not worry about your microphone or video camera because I cannot see or hear you, but you can see or hear me. If you want me to see some evidence of your presence here by way of a question or a comment, there's a Q&A box, and I encourage you to please avail yourself to that for any questions or comments that you have at any point in time during the evening's proceedings, and I will keep an eye on that Q&A box. Our last class, Chapter 10, the Yoga of Divine Presence, the opulences of the Absolute. We looked at Arjuna's now faith-based questions or requests of Krishna, following Krishna's authoritative and crescendo statement about himself, his relationship with those who are devoted to him, and how he reciprocates with those who engage in a relationship of love with him. We spoke a little bit about how our position is to do our best to follow in Arjuna's footsteps. He is our role model for understanding and acting on the Bhagavad-gita, and we took a look at how not to understand the Bhagavad-gita, verses 12 through 18. And we will come back a little bit to how the Bhagavad-gita might be misunderstood by some folks as we go into this evening's class, where Krishna will give us the first round of indications of his own opulences. We'll explore this word, opulence, during the course of our class this evening. We'll also go through a kind of who's who of Vedic celebrities. This is a portion of the Gita that can be challenging for people because Krishna is going to name names. He's going to give us categories and then examples within each of these categories. And for most of us who did not grow up in Vedic culture, who are not really familiar with Vedic culture, we might kind of look at this and say, so what? I have no idea what this category is. I have no idea what this example means. And one can easily fall under the impression that, oh, this is the Hindu portion of the Bhagavad-gita, and this is what provides us with evidence of the Hindu-ness of the Bhagavad-gita. So I'm going to offer some explanations as to who's who and what's what in these various categories. However, I'm going to focus on the essence of what Krishna is telling us by giving us these examples, keeping in mind that when Krishna shows up, he shows up in a way that he kind of fits in with the time, place, and circumstance. That is to say, he fits right in with the culture that he appears in. We'll also talk about Vedic sacrifice in Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga is the name of this particular season of time that we are in. And Krishna will speak about sacrifices and what how he is found represented in sacrifice. And it's particularly relevant for our putting the Bhagavad-gita into practice. So we will cover verses 19 through 25 of chapter 10. Before we go any further, we will chant, call and response, the invocation mantra, which I changed recently. We were chanting Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya for some time. And this seemed like a good time based on the portion of the Bhagavad-gita that we are currently in to introduce a different mantra that can be used as an invocation mantra. So let me give you a quick tour of the diacritical marks indicating the pronunciation cues in the transliterated Sanskrit, the Sanskrit in the Roman alphabet. The dot over the M in Om indicates that we close the back of our tongues to the back of the roof of our mouth at the same time that we bring our lips together in front. The tilde over the N is a nya sound, which is also the middle of your tongue up against the middle of the roof of your mouth. And after a J, the two combine to create a kind of a G sound out of the J instead of a soft J sound. The bar across the top of a vowel indicates a long open version of that vowel. And an accent mark over an S indicates a very deep SH sound, that is to say deep in the back of your mouth, a kind of low-pitched pink noise as opposed to a regular SH, high-pitched white noise. The C in transliterated Sanskrit is always a CH sound. A dot under an S is a regular SH sound. And the dot under the H at the end of a word at the end of a line indicates that a short version of the vowel that precedes the H is echoed back. And if any of that was a head scratcher for you, I hope it'll be self-evident as I lead you in chanting each line. So I chant, you chant back. Om Ajnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. The translation of this invocation mantra: I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my guru, to whom I respectfully bow, has illuminated my vision with the torchlight of knowledge. I'm going to connect a little bit of this invocation mantra to the verses that we are going to cover this evening. But before we move forward, let's take a quick look back to last week. We finished with this verse. Arjuna is speaking to Krishna. O Janardana, another name for Krishna, please describe your magnificent mystic power in detail yet again, for there is no limit to my satisfaction in hearing the nectar of your words. So, with this cluster of verses that Arjuna speaks to Krishna, we find that Arjuna has arrived at a tipping point. He accepts Krishna as the supreme person. He accepts what Krishna has told him as being good advice and factual information. Therefore, his doubts are now gone. He is free from doubt, as Krishna has encouraged him to be from this point forward. From the very beginning of the Bhagavad-gita, Krishna has encouraged Arjuna to slash his doubts with the weapon of knowledge, the knowledge that Krishna is providing to him and, by extension, us. So now Arjuna is continuing to inquire. But instead of inquiring from a place of doubt, he's inquiring now from a place of faith. And he wants to learn more. And this makes perfect sense. We become convinced of something at some point, and it's really at that point that we really get into this particular thing, because first we have to be convinced that something is worthy of our time and attention. Once convinced, once we feel enthusiastic about it, then we really get into it. Then we really get more out of it. So Arjuna is now asking questions for the sake of gaining a deeper understanding of how he can act on Krishna's instructions. So in this case, Krishna has instructed that Arjuna should always think of him, Krishna, become his devotee, meditate on him constantly, even when he is active in the world. So Arjuna is jazzed about following that instruction. He wants to be able to remember Krishna and meditate on Krishna while he's doing his thing in the material world. And he wants to know how to do it. So this is where Arjuna's line of questioning has gone. And Krishna is now very, very pleased to answer this question. And that's where we're going to pick things up. So in this verse, there's a phrase, Atmano Yogam Vibhutam. Vibhutis are like mystic powers. We find this in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras as well, the third pada or chapter of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras dedicated to vibhutis, or the acquisition of mystic power through the perfection of meditation on different objects of meditation associated with gaining mastery over various aspects of material nature. Krishna's own power of yoga is completely transcendental to material nature, and ultimately it brings the individual Atma or person consciousness into union with him, into union with ultimate consciousness. So Krishna, the name Krishna, means all attractive. And so Krishna's ultimate mystic power is that he can attract everyone to him one way or another. And now Krishna is going to describe how that is. So here, another way to understand Atmano Yogam and Vibhutim are to translate them separately rather than together. The science of uniting individual consciousness with supreme consciousness is Atmano Yogam. Atma, the soul, the individual consciousness, the yoga of individual consciousness united with collective or infinite consciousness. And then Vibhutim as majestic transcendental opulence. So opulence is a word that indicates wealth, affluence, abundance, richness, magnificence, something that is majestic, luxurious, abundant. So a lavish display of wealth would be opulence. And in this case, we're talking about the magnificence of Krishna's mystic powers. There are two functions of yoga philosophy that will be served as Krishna starts to enumerate some of his mystic opulences. And the first is the illuminative function. What Krishna is doing here is giving us the opportunity to recreate Arjuna's revelatory experience. So the illuminative function of yoga philosophy is that it provides the means to recreate the experience of self-realized yogis who have described their experience in yoga wisdom texts. So yoga extricates the consciousness, conscious self from the influence of illusion. And that's why we read a yoga wisdom text, not just for intellectual curiosity. It's meant to be functional. It's meant to be put into practice. So by telling Arjuna and by telling us how to connect things in the material world to Krishna, Krishna is therefore giving us a methodology by which we can spiritualize our experience of the material world. And in this way, even though we are here in the material world, by connecting to things of the material world to Krishna, we spiritualize the material world, where we spiritualize our experience and therefore spiritualize our consciousness by this constant practice of connecting things in the world, material world, to the source of the material world, Krishna. Then, the second is the metaphysical function, which is that yoga reveals the divine nature of the world. The deeper we get into our yoga practice, the deeper our sense of connection to all beings and to the spiritual nature of all beings and being itself. So concealed behind the superficial phenomenology of the material world is the transcendent source, the spiritual energy that is transformed into matter that we experience as beings in material bodies in the material world. So yoga reveals the divine nature of the material world. So I hope that you will see how these two functions are served as we move through Krishna's response to Arjuna's request. So we will read through verses 19 through 25, and then come back and look at each verse in some detail. So here we go. Beginning with verse 19. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "Listen, O best of the Kuru dynasty. I shall indeed tell you of my personal powers, but only of those which are prominent, for there is no limit to my divine opulences." Text 20. I am the innermost soul of all souls, O conqueror of sleep, seated within the hearts of all living beings. I am the beginning, middle, and end of all beings and of all being. Text 21. Of the Adityas, I am Vishnu. Of luminaries, I am the radiant sun. Among the Maruts, I am Marichi. And among the stars, I am the moon. Text 22. Of the Vedas, I am the Samaveda. Of the demigods, I am Vasava. Of the senses, I am the mind, and of living beings, I am consciousness. Verse 23. Of the Rudras, I am Shankara. Of the Yakshas and Rakshasas, I am the Lord of Wealth. Of the Vasus, I am fire. And of towering mountains, I am Meru. Text 24. Of priests, O son of Pritha, know me to be the chief Brihaspati. Of military leaders, I am Skanda. And of bodies of water, I am the ocean. Text 25. Of the great sages, I am Bhrigu. Of vibrations, I am the singular sacred syllable. Of sacrifices, I am the quiet chant. And of all that is immovable, I am the Himalayas. So this is the first set of verses where Krishna will speak about his different characteristics in relationship to people, places, and things in the material world. So let's go a little deeper, and we'll begin by chanting the very first verse that Krishna speaks in response to Arjuna. So this is verse 19. I believe I have covered all the relevant diacritical marks. The only other thing to know, which shows up a few times in this verse, is that the Y at the end of a word is sounded as a connector to the very next word. So instead of the sound E, as in he, and then the word Atma, it would be Hyatma. So the Y sound is a bridge right into the next word in the word that follows. So once again, I will chant, you chant back. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Hantate Katayashyami Divyahyatma Vibhutayaha Pradhanyata Kuru Shrestha Nastyanto Vistarasya Me. Translation once again. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "Listen, O best of the Kuru dynasty. I shall indeed tell you of my personal powers, but only of those which are prominent, for there is no limit to my divine opulences." Whoops, not yet. Okay. I chose a different translation of Sri Bhagavan Uvacha than I have used in the past. Usually I will choose the Blessed Lord said or the Beloved Lord said. And in this time I chose the Supreme Personality of Godhead said. This is a phrase, a descriptive of Krishna coined by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada in his edition of Bhagavad-gita as it is, which I thought was particularly apropos at this point. Krishna has established himself as a transcendental person, a categorically different person. And because he is now going to describe how he is the very best of everyone or anything in every category, I thought this particular description, emphasizing Krishna's personality as being supreme, was particularly appropriate. And I'll elaborate on this a little bit farther down the line. Meanwhile, Krishna is not going to go into detail about all of his opulences as Arjuna has requested. And the reason he's not going to do that is because there's just no limit. And as a good teacher, Krishna is going to give Arjuna the important stuff. Here's what you really need to know. Here are the essentials. The details are great, they're nice, but they're not essential. So Krishna is giving the essential stuff. There's another interesting thing to consider. Krishna is unlimited and ever expanding. That's kind of what it means to be the supreme being. And therefore, Krishna is beyond his own understanding. In order to understand himself, he has to expand in order to wrap his head around himself. But as soon as he expands, for the sake of understanding himself, then he expands beyond the range of his understanding, which means he has to expand again just to understand. You get the idea. Krishna is perpetually expanding beyond even his own comprehension. Krishna has to play catch up with himself in order to wrap his head around himself. That's how far out Krishna is. And in order to accept Krishna's advice to devote oneself to him, to develop a relationship of love with him, it is not necessary to understand Krishna completely. Aside from the fact that it's just not possible, it's not necessary, it's not required. So those who are engaged in bhakti yoga, and the yoga of devotional service, are not particularly concerned with understanding Krishna in full, but they don't ever get tired of hearing about Krishna. And that's great, because you'll never get bored, because there's no limit to what you can say about Krishna. And therefore, you'll never run out of things to hear about, nor will hearing about them ever become tiresome, because there's not just unlimited numbers of things, there's unlimited depth to each thing that you can say about Krishna. So even if you hear the same thing, there's always a deeper place to go with that thing. So that's another really far out aspect of topics relating to the absolute, infinite, unlimited truth. So it's a symptom, actually, of a self-realized person to have this attraction to topics relating to the complete absolute truth, and particularly one who is cognizant of their relationship with Krishna, or is cultivating relationship with Krishna, and therefore on the path of self-realization. A symptom of such a person is that they're always interested in hearing more about this unlimitedly amazing and all-attractive person. So Krishna means all-attractive, and one of the ways he attracts everyone is by being the attractive principle, or the essential attractive attribute in every attractive thing. Think of something you're attracted to. Think of someone you find attractive. Something that you find attractive. That attractive quality is Krishna. When we are not cognizant of Krishna being the attractive principle within whatever it is we're attracted to, that's called illusion, forgetfulness, or avidya, ignorance. We ignore the Krishna part of the attraction and just think about how we can enjoy this thing we're attracted to. We place ourselves into the position of the enjoyer, and that's actually Krishna's position. So this is how the material world covers us in such a way that when we see things or people that we're attracted to, we forget the attractive principle and just deal with our attraction and the desire to satisfy our senses relative to that attraction. So when we're attracted to other topics, other than topics concerning the attractive person or the essential attractive principle of anything, then that's an indication of our being in a state of illusion or under the influence of the qualities of material nature, the energy of material nature, rather than the energy of spiritual nature. And that's our kind of default condition, at least certainly for most people. And those of us who are working on making progress on the path of spiritual life, odds are there's a little bit of a struggle with this tendency to be covered and influenced by the material energy. Our society is not very helpful in this regard. We live in a very materialistic society. The media is and all the advertising contained therein is designed to attract and amplify lower modes of nature, that is to say, the modes of passion and ignorance. You don't make a lot of money promoting the mode of goodness, to say nothing of transcending the modes altogether. So we live in an environment that is not conducive to connecting whatever it is we're attracted to Krishna. We're in an environment that actually does just the opposite. And so in order to cultivate spiritual consciousness, rather than just a negation of matter, of trying to make our minds a blank, of shutting down our senses, Krishna is giving us the means to connect his own material energy back to him personally. And in this way, to see Krishna as present everywhere in his energies. And this brings us back to the point I made earlier about the phrase Supreme Personality of Godhead. And before I go back to that, let me just field a couple of questions that have come in. How can the person you are attracted to be Krishna? Aren't they their own person? Is there nothing authentic about them? And what if you're attracted to dark, creepy things? Is that Krishna too? This is a great question. So the person, let's say you're attracted to another person. Well, that person isn't Krishna, but the attractive quality, that experience of attraction, that's coming from Krishna. So that's an important distinction to make. I'm a person, you're a person, everybody is an individual person unto themselves. And therefore, all of us are having our own entirely authentic experience. The difference, I am only experiencing what I experience. I know my thoughts and feelings. You are experiencing your experience and you know your thoughts and feelings. Krishna, as the Param Atma in everyone's heart, knows my thoughts and feelings, your thoughts and feelings, and everyone else's thoughts and feelings. And not just human beings, but animals, all living beings are capable of thinking, feeling, and willing. And Krishna is aware of the thinking, feeling, and willing of all beings. So it's not that the person you're attracted to is really Krishna and there's no validity to their individuality. On the contrary, everyone is an infinitesimal part of the infinite complete whole, according to what Krishna is presenting to us here. And while Krishna is everything. Not everything is Krishna. While Krishna is everyone, not everyone is Krishna. So this sounds a little like a Zen koan. But that's how to understand this distinction of simultaneous oneness and difference, that we are one with Krishna qualitatively as spiritual beings, but quantitatively not each of us is Krishna. Only Krishna is Krishna. So, dark, creepy things? Yeah. The attractive principle in dark, creepy things is also Krishna. The dark, creepy thing, that's Krishna's energy. It's not Krishna personally, but Krishna is personally present even in dark, creepy things. The question is, can you see Krishna in the dark, creepy thing? If you can, it's going to completely change your experience of the dark, creepy thing. We all have dark, creepy things. At least I've got dark, creepy things, and most people I know have, you know, some skeleton banging around in their closet that qualifies as a, you know, dark side. So how do you deal with it? How do you manage that? Do you just give in to the attraction of the dark side and revel in that, seek your pleasure in what the dark stuff has to offer materially? Well, you can do that, and it'll have a beginning, middle, and an end. So Krishna has already advised earlier in the Gita that a wise person understands that the sources of material pleasure are actually the seeds of misery. And a wise person, therefore, doesn't take delight in them. Which is to say, when someone looks into the shadows to find their pleasure without an understanding or awareness of how that dark thing is also Krishna's energy in a different form. One can get lost in that shadow. As soon as you see Krishna in the shadow itself is changed, because it's just like if you're in a dark room and you turn the light on, the darkness disappears. It has to. It's just the nature of light to get rid of darkness. So Krishna is present in innumerable energies in unlimited varieties. And it's just a question of whether or not you can see how Krishna is present in all of his different manifestations of combinations of energy and transformations of energy. So please let me know if that was helpful at all. Meanwhile, Tess asked, but yet we have to live in this material world. Well, at least for the time being, we do. So how do we see Krishna in the material world? That is exactly where Krishna is going with his response to Arjuna. And that's where we're going as we go full speed ahead here. So hang tight, and we'll see how Krishna is going to help us to see him as we live here in the material world. I think George Harrison actually had some things to say about that as well. Okay, so where I was going with this idea of seeing Krishna as being personally present in his energies, as opposed to just experiencing his energies without an awareness of Krishna. There's a difference between a conception of an absolute with no energies and an absolute with unlimited energies. So one interpretation of the Gita that comes from the school of absolute non-dualism would say that Brahman is the spiritual unity behind the diversity that we experience in the material world. And there is no such thing as spiritual diversity, because that's contradictory. The idea that everything spiritual is a unity, an undifferentiated oneness, therefore there cannot possibly be spiritual varieties. And all the varieties that we see in the material world are a function of illusion or Maya. Well, the first problem, of course, with that theory is that if the absolute truth or reality is ultimately an undifferentiated unity, then you can't have Maya or illusion, because as soon as you make a distinction between reality and illusion, you've got a duality. And therefore, you're left with no way to explain our experience of varieties of you and me and things and stuff in the material world if you take the illusion out of the equation, in which case, well, the thing just kind of chases its tail. Here we are, we experience this world, we experience one another. And therefore, we have to acknowledge the validity of our experience and then contextualize the validity of our experience by positing that there is a distinction between the experience of a spirit soul in the material world and spiritual experience. So this is a very constructive kind of duality. So let's explore this just a little bit further before we move into the other verses. Energies are transformed, but people with energies are not necessarily transformed. So for example, if I were to open a business, I would have to get some capital. So therefore I'd have to do some work in order to transform the work energy into money energy. Then the money energy has to be transformed into whatever I invest in order to make the business happen. And the business produces a product or a service, which is another transformation of energy. And then that's experienced by a customer or a client. Their experience is another transformation of energy. So there's all these transformations of energies going on, but I haven't been transformed. I'm still me. Any of you who've undertaken any kind of endeavor in order to turn one thing into another thing has had this experience. The classical example is the example of the potter who is not transformed by the act of transforming a lump of clay into a clay pot. Another example is electricity. Electricity is an energy. And sometimes that energy is transformed in such a way as to provide lights. Sometimes the energy is transformed in such a way as to heat a room. Sometimes the energy is transformed in such a way as to keep our food nice and cold. Sometimes the energy is transformed in such a way as to create a buzz in a needle if you're getting acupuncture with little electrical things attached to it. I don't know if you've ever had that experience. I have. It was weird. Anyway, the point is that varieties of experience in and of themselves are not illusory. Because there's a divine source, an energy that is being transformed in order to facilitate all the varieties of our experiences. But varieties of material experience are a kind of distorted reflection of the varieties of spiritual experience. And because we're talking now about a person who has unlimited spiritual energies and unlimited facets to a spiritual personality, we're talking about unlimited varieties of spiritual experience. So here, Krishna is now going to give Arjuna some hints as to how to spiritualize his material experience. So now, jumping to text 20, I am the innermost soul of all souls, O conqueror of sleep. So here Krishna is saying he is the Paramatma. He is the, as I spoke about earlier, the infinite consciousness within each finite unit of consciousness. He calls Arjuna conqueror of sleep, meaning that for someone who is sleeping in the darkness of ignorance, it isn't really possible to understand the Supreme Person in various ways. So Arjuna himself is above this darkness of sleep. He's awake, in other words. And when we are awake to the divine nature of the world, then we are making a connection to the spiritual through the material. I am the beginning, middle, and end of all beings and of all being. So this is a dual translation of the last words in this verse, indicating that all beings come into being, stay for some time, go out of being when we have material bodies. So Krishna is that beginning, middle, and end, but he's also the beginning, middle, and end of being itself. That is to say, he exists prior to the cosmic manifestation, the material world rolling out and on with the show. He's there while everything's in progress, and when everything's all wrapped up, he is still there. We often hear about the three deities, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, as being in charge of creation, maintenance, and destruction. And as we will see, and as Krishna has alluded to previously as well, all three of those deities are contained within Krishna. We'll see a little bit of that as we go forward. Text 21. Of the Adityas, I am Vishnu. See? Of luminaries, I am the radiant sun. Among the Maruts, I am Marichi. And among the stars, I am the moon. So, you may be wondering, what are the Adityas? So the Adityas are 12 celestial beings who preside over the sun. And the chief among them is Vishnu. Therefore, Krishna is the topmost amongst the Adityas, the 12 celestial beings presiding over the sun. The same thing, similarly, with the Maruts. Marichi is the chief among divinities who preside over the blowing of the winds. There are said to be 50 different kinds of winds blowing in space and in the sky. And the Maruts are the divinities who take care of that. Among the stars, I am the moon. So the Sanskrit word here is nakshatranam, of the stars, or lunar mansions, is a very nice way that one of my teachers has translated this phrase. It also shows up in a couple of different places. Anyway, so of lunar mansions, I am the moon, or among the stars. When we look out at the night sky, the stars are like the little jewels that decorate the sky around the main jewel, which is the beautiful shining moon. This relationship between the sun and moon and Krishna are repeated a couple of times. It'll come back in the 11th chapter and then also in the 15th chapter. The sun and the moon are considered like the opening and closing of Krishna's eyelids. So the difference, of course, is that Krishna's eyes radiate light, whereas our eyes take in light. So not quite exactly the same. Text number 22. Of the Vedas, I am the Samaveda. So the Samaveda is the section of the Vedas that is chanted or sung. So the songs of the Vedas, the beautiful chants of the demigods. I am Vasava. This is another name for Indra, the king of heaven. So Indra is considered to be the most opulent demigod. He's got the wealthiest situation. He's got the most beautiful planet and palace. Everything is like super gorgeous on Indra Loka, the planet of Indra. So the king of heaven. Of the senses, I am the mind. So the mind is like the reservoir of the senses. All the senses feed into the mind, and the mind is almost impossible to control. So you can think of your mind as being a representative of Krishna when it is unconquerable. When you cannot overcome the mind, then you can think, well, this is Krishna. Because Krishna is unconquerable, just like my mind. And therefore my mind is here to remind me of Krishna and bring my mind to Krishna. It's a little bit of philosophical judo. Of living beings, I am consciousness. So this gets back to the earlier question. Our consciousness is a spark of Krishna's consciousness, which is to say that Krishna experiences everything we experience. And when we're cognizant of that, then we may be selective about what kind of experience we want to share with Krishna, because we're sharing it with Krishna. The difference, of course, as I said earlier, we know our experience, but Krishna knows everyone's experience. So awareness of this may give us a little additional impetus to bring things to our senses that are in higher modes of being, that are likely to elevate consciousness. What would Krishna like to see, as opposed to what would I like to see? I may like to see dark, creepy things. So now I'll ask myself, well, is this Krishna's favorite part of himself? Is this going to be something that is either enjoyable for Krishna, or that Krishna would see as being beneficial to my senses, to my consciousness, to my spiritual development? That also is a way of changing that, that experience. Remembering that Krishna is our well-wisher, that he's not judging us because we like dark, creepy things, but rather because he is, as he has said repeatedly to Arjuna, because he is speaking for his benefit out of affection. He's giving us all good advice as to how to direct our consciousness in order to achieve ultimate happiness, sustainable happiness, ultimate freedom from miseries of material existence. You also can't have experience at all without consciousness. All experience begins with consciousness. So it makes perfect sense that of living beings, Krishna would be consciousness, because that's the one essential thing a living being must have in order to experience anything at all. Verse 23, of the Rudras, I am Shankara. This is another name for Lord Shiva. So Shiva is the topmost of the Rudras, or the 11 celestial beings involved in the cosmic destruction. So Shiva is the head of that crew. Of Yakshas and Rakshasas, I am the Lord of wealth. So this is a reference to Kuvera, who is the treasurer of the demigods. Yakshas and Rakshasas are ghostly and ghastly beings, respectively. So Kuvera is kind of like the bankers of the ghosts and ghastly beings. Of the Vasus, I am fire. So this is another name for Agni. And of towering mountains, I am Meru. So Meru is a mountain that, according to Vedic cosmology, exists in a whole other dimension of the universe. So we're not going to see it. It is understood to be the highest of celestial mountains, and it is known for being exceptionally rich in natural resources. You can read books on Vedic cosmology, and that will give you a sense of what Mount Meru is. It's kind of the central mountain in the plane of what is called Bhumandala, or the earthly plane, the middle planetary system. Text number 24. Of priests, O son of Prita, know me to be the chief, Brihaspati. So Brihaspati is the priest for Indra, the aforementioned most opulent of the demigods, the king of heaven. And Brihaspati is the chief amongst all the priests of the celestial realms. Of military leaders, I am Skanda, another name for Kartikeya, who is the son of Parvati and Lord Shiva, and he is the chief of all military commanders. And of bodies of water, I am the ocean, obviously the largest, deepest body of water that one can find. Text 25, of the great sages, I am Bhrigu. So Bhrigu is one of the many sage sons of Brahma, the first created being, and he is the foremost of these powerful sages. Of vibrations, I am the singular sacred syllable. This is a reference to the syllable Om. And as we have discussed previously, Krishna, being synonymous with the sound Om, corresponds to Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, wherein he speaks about Ishvara as incarnating in the sound Om, being synonymous with the sound Om. And then the next part also relates to Patanjali's teachings in the Yoga Sutras. Of sacrifices, I am the quiet chant. This is japa, or the repetition of sacred sound, softly, to oneself. So what Krishna is saying here is, amongst methods of meditation, I am the chanting of mantra that is done to quietly amongst just for oneself, or in private, solitary or internal, inward turning concentration on a sound, on a transcendental sound by its soft repetition. In other words, just loud enough so that you can hear it make its way from your mouth to your ear. This is the recommended sacrifice in this particular period of time, Kali Yuga, the Iron Age of quarrel and hypocrisy. Different ages have different dharmas or different recommended ways to respond to one's destiny. So if it's your destiny to take birth in Satya Yuga or Dwapara Yuga or any of these other yugas or seasons of time according to the cyclical time system of Vedic calculation. Here we are in Kali Yuga, the winter of our discontent. This very simple method of mantra meditation, inward turning focus on transcendental sound, is the recommended way for us to respond to this particular fate of being here in the material world during Kali Yuga. And then finally, of all that is immovable, I am the Himalayas, the greatest of mountain ranges. So just quickly to wrap this up, the essence of this idea, irrespective of the details of Maruts and Adityas and other things that we may not be so culturally familiar with, pick a category. What is the greatest thing in that category? That's Krishna. Krishna is represented by that thing. So for example, of pumpkins, Krishna is the great pumpkin. Now, when Halloween comes around and you're watching the Peanuts special, you won't just see Charlie Brown and Lucy and Snoopy. You'll see Krishna, because Krishna is the great pumpkin. Christmas time comes around. Who is the greatest of reindeer? Right, Rudolph. So when that Christmas special that just never seems to go away ever comes back around, before you change the channel, you won't just see Rudolph or Burl Ives. I think that's who's in it. You'll see Krishna. You'll remember Krishna is the greatest reindeer. Pick a category. What is the greatest thing in that category? There is Krishna. So when you see wonderful, amazing manifestations of material nature, one of the things that we've been doing lately, even though you shouldn't be looking at screens right before you go to sleep, but you know, we will break out our devices and look at particular Instagram feeds that are all about birds. They're amazing. They're like the most amazing, complex, beautiful, and sometimes hilarious designs for a creature that you could ever imagine. Testimony to Krishna's unlimited imagination. And if you think that all just happens by accident, then okay, I'm not buying it though. So this is a way to connect with Krishna. Get on social media, follow something where somebody's posting amazing photos of nature and creatures in nature, and then remember that that amazing beauty that you see in this particular bird, or the ridiculousness of the design of some deep sea creature, I mean, like the weirdness of it. Whatever's the weirdest looking thing, that's Krishna. Whatever's the most beautiful thing, that's also Krishna. That's the point. Not to know the difference between this particular Vedic category of thing or that particular Vedic category of thing that's specific to Vedic culture. But rather to understand that, yeah, when we look at the cosmos, when we look at some spectacularly beautiful, faraway galaxy, some formation of stars, who knows how far away, there's Krishna. The attractive principle in all things is Krishna, and therefore we can connect to Krishna in every beautiful and spectacular thing we see in the material world. And we will continue to go even deeper into this idea as we move forward with the verses coming up. So for tonight, we didn't do that. Any questions? If you have any questions, of course, we've run a little bit over, so thank you for spending a little extra time with me this evening. I really appreciate your hanging around. Questions after the fact, please send them to me, Hari@Hari-kirtana.com, or post them on our Facebook group and put them up for discussion for everyone. Next week, we will continue with sages and singers and horses and elephants, cows and snakes, birds and beasts, rivers and warriors, purifiers and sciences. We will find out how Krishna appears in each of these categories. And that's all I have for you this evening. Tess, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for being here. And to all of you, it is very, very wonderful to see you all here, and I deeply appreciate all of you spending your time with me. Jessica, it's nice to see you. All right, I wish you all a very, very wonderful rest of your evening or day, as the case may be. It is always a great pleasure for me to be here with you, an honor to have you here with me. Thank you very, very much, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Where'd it go? There it is. All righty. Good night.